Council of Dad. I'm glad you're here tonight, Kurt, because you've got good opinions on tech and frustrations. Here's my question. We got some decent browsers out there, right? Mozilla, uh, uh, Google. Some say the Edge is decent. I don't know, but you got some decent browsers out there. But why does some software hate certain browsers and sometimes only on certain devices?
Joe, you want to go first?
Sure. It's because they're coded differently. They interpret HTML differently. As It's just how it works. Although nowadays most browsers are a branch of Chromium, which is what runs Chrome, and so most browsers will interpret things relatively the same, but there are still nuances. But yeah, up until a couple years ago, at my work, we had to make sure all of our web interfaces worked with Internet Explorer because we were still using Internet Explorer.
Well, how come there were definitely sites that said you could only use Internet Explorer?
Oh,
it was it drives me crazy
because they're coded very, very differently.
Okay. But what about from device to device? Because I can use Mozilla on my PC and I can get to a site, but then I open it up on my phone, my Android phone, Mozilla may or may not go to the site, and I open up Mozilla on my iPhone, it may or may not go to the site, and there's still Mozilla.
And then there's different compatibility modes that stuff run in, and so you've got, even though it's Mozilla,
I'm asking the question because it's just making me more angry.
Yeah. So even though it's Mozilla desktop versus Mozilla mobile, which again are coded differently. So yeah, like for instance,
why though?
Because
it's actually so the easy answer is think Mac versus PC.
Yep.
If you code a program for the PC, it is not going to work on a Mac just natively. It has to be programmed specifically for the Mac. So same thing with the browsers. Well, a little different, but go with me on this because it's the closest analogy that we've got. Having Mozilla on the phone. Yeah, I'm looking at a mirror. Sure. Mozilla on the phone versus Mozilla on the PC. It may as well be called a different product. While it may maintain some of the same core code, how it works with the device is way different.
Yep.
And it is very much Mac versus PC type of thing. It's a compatibility thing. And I was going to be way more harsh than Joe. And I was going to say it's because the developers aren't very good. Because literally part of the reason why we have standards like HTML5 is to be able to code web pages so they work uniformly across devices. However,
there are sections of code that I have written that says, okay, if they are using Internet Explorer, do this. If they are using anything else, generally anything else, do this instead, because that's how it needs to interpret it so that it can at least, if not look the same, at least function almost the same.
And then it gets a little weirder too, because like I think what a lot of times happens for web apps is they use the core. Let's use HTML5 just as the example. They use the core HTML5 to code the web page, and that's great. But now they have some performance problems because the browser might be slower or whatever. So they veer off of that code base to make it more efficient to run in that browser. And once they do that, then they've branched off, and now it may not be better on a different browser, on a different computer or whatever. It's just, there's a lot of complexity to it, and we've gotten actually spoiled by web apps. We have expectations because web apps have gotten so good. I mean, literally, Joe remembers this, I'm sure. But back in the day, saying, oh, yeah, we're going to have our applications all like run in web pages. Stop it. We're going to have separate applications for the computers and the whatever. But having them actually be apps that run in a browser, that's kind of a new thing. And granted, it's what, 15 years old, maybe ish.
And so many companies are using antiquated stuff simply for cost measures. They don't want to update. When I first started working at Blue Cross, what is it now? 13 years ago now? 12 years ago? Something like that. I had a Windows XP machine. And then we jumped from Windows XP to Windows 7, and now we're on Windows 10, but
which is going end of life. So
Basically, they ride everything until end of life, until they're forced to upgrade. And even then, companies like Microsoft make bank off of offering contracts to extend end of life. So we paid for extra support for Windows XP for years for extra. So they didn't have to update our machines, basically.
If it wasn't for Microsoft saying Internet Explorer is going end of life and we're not going to use it anymore or include it in the operating system, banks would still be requiring Internet Explorer.
Yeah.
There's still government systems that run off of floppy disks.
Yes.
So like it's
well, in a real world story that is a little crazy, Hugh, who we've referenced earlier tonight, his dad, I can't remember if his grandfather started the company or if it was his dad, but basically his dad ran Morrison Thread Company and wrote an accounting program and they started on Windows 95, got to Windows 98, and then it wouldn't run on XP. So when I met him and we were at the end of life of XP, he still had that him and his brother now run a Windows 98 computer just for that. And it was starting to die. And so I told him about, hey, you can always get an XP computer and run an emulator, or you can put the drive in there. So he did that for a while. And finally, like within the last 3 years, this is 2024 as of this recording. So since COVID, he was having some more problems with it. I'm like, Hugh, seriously, tell me what this program does. And he was describing it. I'm like, dude, there's so many programs out there that do exactly that. And he's like, really? And he looked into it because they had just been nursing old tech along for decades because his dad hand coded this thing and it just worked a certain way. And I think they ended up going with QuickBooks. It's like, I'm telling you, man, there's so many out there.
And because of situations like that, there are specialist companies that make Windows XP or Windows 98, old operating system with new hardware. That's what they do, and they make bank on that. They because they know that you can't find this hardly anywhere, so they can charge basically whatever they want. And businesses in general get upcharged way more than normal consumers would. So
we do outsourced IT, and one of the companies that we support does chemical testing. And have been in business for a very long time. They're running machines that are still running on Windows 2000 because the hardware to interface with the testing machines doesn't work with newer computers. And to upgrade the whole kit and caboodle, $70,000.
I know it's kind of a big number, but that's not a huge number.
It depends on what their monthly income is.
Yeah, it depends on the scale of the business.
Yeah.
For something like Blue Cross Blue Shield, 70,000 is relatively a drop in the bucket.
Right.
But for a small,
that's a big purchase for us, but not out of range.
Right. Well, and then
you're right.
Cash flow and everything. So, and I don't know, but my guess is that at some point we may have to drop them as clients because we can't support that old stuff.
Yeah.
And because we can't keep them safe, because that's the other part. Security is a big deal. All those security holes in the old operating systems are forever and always open now.
Because they're not getting updates, and they haven't for decades.
Right.
I mean, even just think, we started this conversation with web browsers. Think about back when every web browser used Flash a ton.
Yes.
But it had so many issues with it running code just without any security checks, and so it got completely retired instead of patched. I mean, back
it
when
stuck around longer than it should have too.
Oh, it really did. I mean, you would, as a teenager, it was okay. Let's go to this website and have this huge list of games that ran using Flash. I mean, my kids, they're playing Bloons nowadays. Bloons back in the day was a web-based Flash game. And so they have, graduated well beyond that because Flash hasn't been used in I don't know what, a decade or two at this point. So yeah.
It's an interesting ride. So before we get out of here, I want to say go listen to the Smiling Homeschooler with the superstar Kelsey Ard on it. Thanks for name dropping us. Yeah, we're available for interviews. $1,000 a pop.
Just make sure you don't fork your code too much. And that's the show.